Hello, class. Sorry it took me a minute to get going. Oh, yeah, let's do full camera. I was just putting on makeup because I'm like recording a video that's gonna be on the internet for the foreseeable future. And I couldn't find my mascara. If you don't know what that is, it's like the stuff that goes on your eyelashes. So I was like, okay, I gotta stop looking and start lecturing. I'm already online. So I feel like a little freak with no eyelashes. Sorry if you can't relate, but that's just what's going on today. Okay, let's get into it. Announcements. I guess nothing super serious yet, but some things I want to plug. Also, feel free to chat. I think I figured out how to see the chat regularly while I'm streaming, so I can like chirp back at you or not. Participation last week was really fun, so do participate. I really like that. Secondly, my office hours are 9:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. I should say on Friday. It should say on Friday. They're on Fridays on Zoom. Come chitty chat about anything. If you review over the syllabus, there might be an additional reason you should visit office hours. But yeah, when I said that I'm here for your academic well-being, I meant it. So come talk about anything. Come talk about your future. Come talk about your life. I don't care. Come talk about class. It'll make your assignments better, at least ostensibly. So office hours. Just want to re-impress to you that those are available. And also to start reading wellness. Yeah. Start reading. It may feel like, oh, this class, I watch a lecture, I take a quiz, I do an activity, and the homework isn't really ramping up yet. The other thing that you need to be doing is reading this wellness book because there's only 2 deadlines, but this is a 600-page book, so I don't want you to, the week before, realize that you have this deadline and then need to read 300 pages and then for it to be an unpleasant experience, okay? Good morning, Amy, and any other participants watching live. So go ahead and read wellness. You can even see, listen, big reader, my little reading setup behind me. I've got it's not a Kindle, it's a Kobo. It's Rakuten's version of a Kindle, and you can see my little remote. So I'm laying in bed just doing this, reading my books, okay? So channel that energy, start reading wellness. Okay, that's all for announcements. Just gentle reminders today. And one more thing I wanted to go over. Thank you all for completing quiz 1. I hope you're understanding kind of the point of quizzes. Again, they are graded for correctness, but really they're open book, open note, and they're to make sure that we're all on the same page about things. Also, your exam, I know it's like scary and on February 6th to be thinking about your final exam that's going to happen in May, but will look a lot like those quizzes. So basically you'll be able to back reference quizzes and assignments, homeworks type things. So I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about things on the quizzes. The most frequently missed question was the one about, I don't remember how I phrased it, but it had the word exclusively. So it was like, having a bachelor's degree or attending college extends your life exclusively by imparting health knowledge, literacy, coping, problem solving. If I had not included the word exclusively, that is true. It does prolong your life in that way, but exclusively is what makes it false, because your educational attainment is also improving these things, your income, working conditions, right? We know that those are salient social determinants of health. Also that it's increasing your control beliefs, your social standing, your social networks, social capital, economic resources, right? So it's the word exclusively that makes that false. I know it's a little bit difficult to not be able to control F every single one of the quiz answers, but we got to be on the same page about diagrams as well. So I'm happy to go over quiz questions with you as well. That was just the most frequently missed one, so I wanted to go over that with you. Also from last week, previously on Intro to Epidemiology, we learned about the social determinants of health. Don't want to belabor this too much because we talked about it last week, but these will be a central idea that you're going to come back to, and certainly something that you should include in your unit homework 1. I don't even know if I said it in the prompt, but you're looking at the social determinants of health, right? So that's a term that should be used and you should think about regularly. Expand your thinking beyond just behavioral and genetic explanations of health, right? And when you're thinking about social determinants of health and thinking about applying them, especially for your Unit 1 homework, see if you can do something like these folks did, look to the literature and find factors on different levels, right? And this one is an adapted ecological model of the determinants of physical activity. So yes, they've got the psychological individual and behavior would be in an individual, but then they've got different things on different factors. Even in your unit homework 1, which we'll talk about at the end, I only ask you to talk about 2 different levels. So you don't even have to do all this. This is above and beyond. But in case you were thinking about having difficulty racking your brain, thinking about what social determinants of health or multi-level factors impact your health outcome of interest. Here's a good one for physical activity. Obviously, physical activity is a correlate for a lot of health outcomes, so this may be helpful to you. All right, today I'm learning how to use Canva to make these thumbnails, so there it is. It's also going to be our new little title slide. We're talking about health disparities. I do want to say for this week and next, we'll be talking about discrimination, we'll be talking about structural disadvantage, we'll be talking about that on the lines of race, ethnicity especially, but also we'll just be talking about minoritized and marginalized populations generally. This is an online class. Take whatever emotional space you need to process this. It is like quite a sad thing to think about the fact that folks are dying preventable deaths and experiencing preventable, very negative health outcomes, and to be able to point to the structures that cause them, right? And this may be lived experience to some of you. Like, this might happen to folks you know, this might be happening in your community and might already be salient to you, and I don't mean to make academic fodder of shit that's real. So I encourage you to take whatever emotional space you need. Click off this lecture, watch it later. You don't have to participate in live chat, of course, if this is upsetting or distressing to you. And yeah, generally I'm here for you if you also want to talk one-on-one about these things. Now, this is a graphic that you've probably seen. I want to give you, listen, I think it's only Amy in chat, but I want to give you a couple minutes to just think about, and actually it's going to be like a minute or two, to think about where you've seen this graphic before and what's happening. Feel free to put it in chat or not. Think to yourself. I won't Dora this one too fast. So I'm asking you where you've seen it before and to explain to me what's going on. I have a window to my right, so I'm looking at the rain. Okay. If you've never seen this before, that's very interesting, and happy first time seeing this. Let's just start with the first two. Oh, Amy, I've only seen the first two in my diversity in schooling course. Yeah, my professor showed it to us to teach us the definition of equality versus equity and the importance of equity. Great, great. We'll come back to this at the end. In fact, I'll do the same thing. I'll only go over the first two. Oh, excuse me. So, here we've got 3 folks. Our tall friend, our medium friend, and smallest man in the world. Isn't that a new Taylor Swift title track? Anyone up on the Tortured Poets department? Taylor Swift news? Sorry to the folks who don't care, but smallest man in the world. And they're all wanting to look over the fence and watch this baseball game, participate in what's going on, right? And so to help them get past this fence, how did they distribute the resources? They distributed them equally, right? Each person gets a box, and that's equal distribution. And then what's happening in the second one? In fact, this person can participate in watching the baseball game without further distribution of resources, is already able to. So, with the same 3 boxes, distributing them equitably, this person needs 1 to be able to participate and see the baseball game, but this person needs 2. So that would be an equitable distribution of resources, right? So that's probably what your professor went over before. And that's what's happening. And then we'll see the same thing. The same thing exists a little bit with health inequality and health inequities, right? So, and the transverse of that is disparities. So let's first distinguish a healthcare disparity. Care, obviously, is a huge determinant of health. Your access to care, healthcare, the quality of that care, the barriers to accessing that care. So disparities exist in the healthcare realm and possibly may manifest into health outcome or just regular health disparities, right? But to define a healthcare disparity, that's the unequal distribution or access to healthcare services, healthcare resources, and healthcare outcomes. Again, healthcare outcomes. So this is like time to see a doctor, screening uptake. It's a lot of folks get late diagnosis for HIV because of healthcare disparities, right? Among different population groups. So here's an example paper. And basically what they found, which this is an exercise you know how to do if you went to activity or looked at the activity slides last week, they found that those living in rural areas face barriers in accessing mental health services. So this is a rural-urban healthcare provider disparity. Sorry if you could hear people absolutely gunning it up my street outside. It is what it is. So provider disparity would be a healthcare disparity, right, in Alaska and New Mexico. So those are areas that they have big rural. And that's what they found. And again, that's on the care side. That can then result in a health disparity. A health disparity, like I said, kind of the invisible word here would be outcome. Possibly health behavior disparity, but more outcome. And this is systematic differences in any measurable aspect of health outcomes due to the different distribution of social conditions across those populations. Right? And the transverse of this is going to be a health inequity. And so because of that previous care disparity that we already talked about, that can manifest into a health disparity. Those living in rural areas experience poorer mental health, right? Versus just distance to a provider, as a result of a difference in community infrastructure. So that's the distribution of social condition in that population. This is from your reading too. Health disparities are systematic, plausibly avoidable health differences adversely affecting socially disadvantaged groups. They may reflect social disadvantage, but causality need not be established. We'll talk more about establishing causality later in the semester, and we'll come to understand sort of how this happens and why this is, but take this for what it is for now. And there's your citation. This is in China, not in Alaska and New Mexico, but they are linking it to community structure, right? So that's what makes it a health disparity. Now, I tried to think, again, if there's that substantive difference and there are social conditions involved, then it's a disparity. But not all differences in health between two populations, in health outcomes between two populations, are a disparity. So I really tried to think of really a pure health inequality that would have no bearing in social conditions. Right, when we think of factors that influence health, we think of biological, environmental, which includes social, and then we think of genetic. So health inequalities that are truly not due to any social conditions, because behaviors also are resulted from environment and social conditions, would be purely genetic. So a health inequality is an observed difference in health outcomes or health status between different populations or groups. And this article is about sickle cell disease and the inequality, but Tay-Sachs, cystic fibrosis, and sickle cell disease are all due purely to genetic mutations. And even some people say, like, oh, because of the resulting social outcomes, like, it can also be considered a disparity. But because they're all genetic mutations, these are inequalities. This is to say, just because you, this will make you a better advocate, right, for your community and for the conditions that you care about if you are to talk about health issues in the future, right? Just because there's a difference in health outcomes between population A and population B does not inherently make it something that we need to fix, something that we need to change, right? I implore you to make sure that there are those social conditions. I mean, probably there are, but then put language to them and find out why it is changeable, where it is changeable, why it's important, why it's preventable. Okay? So that's an inequality, right? No social conditions involved, just a difference. Versus an inequity. The unfair and avoidable differences in health outcomes or access to healthcare services between different populations or groups. For example, and we'll talk about this later this lecture actually, Black women face a maternal mortality rate. This is maternal mortality is passing away during pregnancy or in the year following due to pregnancy-related complications. That's maternal mortality rate 3 times higher. Estimates differ as well. We'll look at some different ones than that of white women, even when accounting for socioeconomic factors. Right, and we'll talk about some narratives of this today. This disparity suggests the presence of structural and systemic factors contributing to the inequity. So, this talks broadly about health equity among Black women in the United States, and they talk about maternal morbidity and mortality as what I believe to be the most egregious in the United States, health inequity. Yeah. So remember, something that you should come out of this class knowing is how to differentiate a health inequality and a health inequity, okay? It's just like that slide, right? Is it due to a difference in resources? From your reading, I'll let you read this on your own time. Is there anything I want to highlight? Yeah, let's just go over this. Health differences, again, plausibly avoidable health difference. If it's just a health difference that's not systematic, plausibly avoidable, then it's just an inequality, right? But a disparity or an inequity is these things, systematic, plausibly avoidable. According to race or ethnicity, skin color, religion or nationality, socioeconomic resources or position, like we talked about last week, income, wealth, education, or occupation. Some of you are thinking about writing about disparities on the basis of occupation, and I'm here for it. I think you should do that. Gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, geography. We talked about rural, urban, and we'll talk about geography more. Age is kind of a hard one, depending, because we can look at age adjusted outcomes as well. So age, I would really hesitate to write about, but all these things, I'd say these are the scope of things for your Unit 1 homework. Write about a disparity defined by any of these things. Or other characteristics associated with discrimination or marginalization. So just those are ideas while you're thinking about, like, oh, I don't know a disparity to write about. If any of these things make you think of a health outcome, that might be a good disparity to write about. Yeah, I'll let you read that on your own time. Now, this might not be something you've known about, and that's okay, because it's not your fault. It is the press's. So this is just something I want to bring up as well about why this is important and why diversity and equity in the U.S., this, what's it called? We're fulfilling that requirement for this class, right? Diversity, equity in the U.S. Why it's important. because you won't get this in popular press. I know this is a little dated, 1996 to 2005. I was still a wee child. But let's just look at this highlighted part. Social inequalities, not individual behavior, are the main reason why racial and ethnic minorities, we'll unpack this too, get sicker and die sooner than the rest of the population. And the root cause of disparities in health are inequalities in social, economic, physical, environmental conditions, right? We talked about this last week and opened this week with it. Yet, they looked at 3,000 articles talking about health disparities. Only 30% of articles provided rationale why, and only 4% of articles invoked a social justice rationale. For both causes and solutions, behavioral explanations dominated the discourse, right? And thinking back to eco-social models, the social ecological model, we know that individual risk factors and behavior, while important, do not happen in a vacuum, do not comprise the entirety of a person's accrual of risk factors, right? So, the dominance of these behavioral explanations may limit public support for policy solutions to eliminate disparities, right? And we see this. We see a lot of kind of blaming upon behaviors. The legacy of public health has been very behaviorally focused for this reason, and is only now emerging to be more social, systemic, and change the environment. Before, we kind of threw up our hands up and we're like, built environment, that's really difficult or impossible to change. Now we're looking at them as changeable factors because we're realizing how salient they are to health. Let's also just talk about racial and ethnic minorities. We'll talk about the minority stress model too. It's a word that is not my favorite, but we live with it. We're dealing with it. There is an echelon of folks, and if you know these folks, you know these folks, who use minorities to mean everyone who is not a cis-het white person. And it's funny because in the actual counting numbers of majority, minority, white folks are outnumbered in California and Texas. White folks no longer the majority. This is true in the United States, but California and Texas, when they say minorities, you're outnumbered by Latinx populations in California. So not only is it not true, but it's also somewhat of an othering term. I implore you to say what you mean. I guess that's what I'm inviting you to say. If you mean black and brown folks, say that. If you mean people of color, say that. If you mean queer people, say that. If you mean gay men, say that. If you mean trans folks, say that, right? Being as specific as possible can kind of route use of this term. But racial and ethnic minorities, they're just saying non-white folks. So even though it's not truly the population breakdown anymore. So that's my call to action to you. Be specific about who you're comparing, especially with regard to disparities. Okay, this is going to be your most important slide. And it was just me spitballing on the page, but for your quiz, you're asked how you would do this, how you would use a health equity lens, and you could basically, there is an outcome that I ask you to do about it, and you could just name the inequality and kind of like explain how you would do the rest, right? But for your Unit 1 homework where you're talking about a disparity, this is what I encourage you to do. If you kind of walk through all of these things, you will have accomplished it, right? And using a health justice lens, what levels of the social ecological model need to change? I'm asking you to come up with a couple intervention components on levels of the social ecological model, so you will have gone through all these steps if you do your Unit 1 homework well. So there you go, using a health equity lens. Thinking about what the inequality is, just raw, what is the difference, right? Between who and who, between what groups? Then what barriers do people face, and are there differences in needs among groups? To consider the social determinants of health. If there is an adapted ecological model for whatever outcome you're looking at, great. Otherwise, you might have to look to the literature and figure out some salient social determinants of health yourself. And you can decide, is this a disparity in an inequity? Are there systematic differences that are causing this difference? And then, what levels of the social ecological model need to change? So, when you're taking action, think about that. If you remember, the biggest kind of metric that we have to measure health is life expectancy. So, by geography, we're going to just go over a few disparities. America, we're number 1, right? Not in life expectancy. Versus other HIC's high-income countries, life expectancy has continued to decline in the US while rebounding in most comparable countries. We got hit hard by COVID, so that's where that big dip is. It's our number 3 cause of death in the US. So there's comparable country average. They're not comparing us to low to middle income countries. This is like Western nations. But I think we're back up around 76-ish now. Yeah, this is where this is, 76. And then for women, it pushes up to 78 again. But recent estimates have us steeply declining life expectancy. I almost thought about making one of your quiz questions to figure out what your life expectancy might be. I don't know if you've ever had a hunch about how you might die, but I give you a couple of like interactive maps that you can look it up on. We'll go over it. We'll get there. And then this is the same thing, just with a different type of plot. That Americans in most states are expected to live shorter lives than people in other countries. And this is European Union and non-European Union. And again, these are high-income countries. Now, how are we doing? We're doing all right. Not as bad as the South, of course. Not as well, question mark, as the Northeast, right? And these are things that you've probably seen if you are a Kines major, human development major. Oh, that's terrifying? Yeah. Yeah, big time. There are maps that depict this too, and depict all the things that you would expect to be associated with life expectancy. There are great ones on the CDC website if you are curious about doing this for your Unit 1 homework and want to write about health disparities. Great regional plots about, unemployment, physical activity, built environment, food access, all the things we talked about last week, housing security, housing prices, the ratio of housing prices to income, right? That obviously will correlate with all these things. Okay, taking it a little deeper. We started with our country compared to other countries. Now we're looking at it by region. It goes deeper. Your life expectancy at birth. This is such an interesting metric to me, and was when I was in your shoes at least, that life expectancy at birth is a measure of the average number of years a newborn is expected to live, assuming the current age-adjusted mortality rates remain unchanged. This is why behavioral explanations plague me so much. Based on the demography of the area, the built environment of the area, what we already know about structures, that baby who's done nothing except come out the womb already has a ticking time clock, and we can estimate how long that baby is projected to live based on the conditions. And the behavioral leverage within that, much smaller. So, I decided to add these. These are optional readings just because I didn't add them on the syllabus, but if this is interesting to you and possibly might help you on your Unit 1 homework, go read this time your zip code might determine how long you live. I had a professor in undergrad. I'm not compelled that, maybe I am. But for 10 minutes, he was like, what is the one number that most greatly predicts your health? And people were like, oh, it's your weight. Oh, it's your hemoglobin A1C. Oh, it's your lipid ABC. No, he was like, it's your zip code. It is your zip code. We can determine your life expectancy based on your census tract. It isn't even just your region that we looked at before, right? The predictive models are so good that you can look by granular neighborhood. So this is how life expectancy differs dramatically between neighborhoods of Chicago. There was a really good TikTok, and I tried to find it last semester too, of this overlaid with the locations of Trader Joe's. And it looked like what you could imagine. And then here, this is NCHS life expectancy at birth, also linked on Canvas. Has the entire country. I set it to California and looked at San Diego County, but if you're born in the United States, I implore you to see if there's data for your area and figure out what your life expectancy at birth was. Okay, APHA 2018 story time. APHA is the American Public Health Association, and they hold annual conferences, and they switch like East Coast to West Coast. I graduated college in 2018, and I had applied for one cycle of MPHs. It's a Master's of Public Health, for those of you who don't know. And if you do want to know, I'm happy to talk about it that at some other time. And I was presenting at this conference with people from my undergrad. This is people from my undergrad. And it was in San Diego. So this is the San Diego downtown convention center where they hold Comic-Con, right? Except I was there for public health. Thinking about applying to master's programs. This is during my gap year. And this is the only picture I had, unfortunately. I have this and like pictures of like business cards that I took pictures of. Like, what was I doing? But what I remember seeing, and this is the story, is throughout the big convention center, they had big billboards. Imagine like you see a highway sign, big visibility, and it would have a picture of a baby, it would have a picture of a zip code, and it had a picture of a life expectancy. And like I knew this, we learn about, I'm teaching you about all the social things that would impact your health. But right, thinking about it, prescribed at birth. Because this baby was born in a different zip code than the other baby, life expectancy, 20 years less. And they had that for different regions all over the US. As a call to action to change, you can see the theme of this year, it changes every year, was health equity now. That year at APHA was also the year that we voted to consider racism a public health crisis and police violence a public health crisis. So there you go, health equity now. And another note about zip codes. This one I saw during my master's, and I'll give you the gist of like what he says, but go watch Stephen DeBerry talk about it because this is his expertise. Of like, yes, all of these things are true, and the structures are so deeply embedded. This is called why the wrong side of the tracks is usually the east side of cities. Yes, there are things like creating food deserts, lack of the Trader Joe's, car-centric society. But things that are so deeply embedded that they have weaponized, I don't want to say no, I do want to say weaponized. They've weaponized the Earth's rotation to create disparities. Now, this sounds real tinfoil hat, but if the Earth is turning this way, they'll put a power plant, and then the air from that will move east. So east sides of cities are downwind from things. So if the west side of a city is producing, this is true in the United States. If the is it true globally? Yes. If the west side of a city is producing emissions, the east side will catch it. If there exists a freeway, it will impact the east side more because of the Earth's rotation. So you can see they've got the fire up and the smoke is chasing. This was mind-blowing stuff to me. Quite nefarious that they've clustered disadvantage toward the east side of cities to use the Earth's rotation to shove off environmental waste, right? So watch that TED Talk if you feel so inspired, but that's the gist of it. Oh my, yeah. Again, if you're watching this recorded, pause, go watch it, and come back. Oh, it's coming down now. Sorry, I'm watching the rain. Okay, if you've come back from watching that video. Notable racial disparities in health. Next week, we'll talk more about fundamental causes, Racism is a fundamental cause of health disparities, but we have to go over disparities first, right? And the role of policy, root causes and the role of policy. But today we're going to look at some disparities. And again, this is the frustrating part. I hope it can inspire you to write something for Unit 1 homework. Think about how it can be actionable, but here we go. Biggest health metric, life expectancy, right? This is in the US 2019 and 2020, so this includes COVID. Vital statistics. This is from NCHS, which also does the map. So Asians, we're living long. Hispanic, a little bit less. White, less. Black, less. And American Indian or Alaska Native. Short life expectancy. Truncated too, like I showed you that graph before that had dropped off pretty steeply, 2020. The difference, here's the difference depicted by race, 2019 to 2020. You can see the white as a result of COVID and other, again, this is overall mortality. Not that steep of a fall off between 2019 and 2020, but over time, Hispanic populations, Black populations, American Indian and or Alaska Native populations. Think about that and who bore the mortality toll of COVID. Something you could write about if you are interested. Cancer. This one pretty much covers all cancers. If you do want to write about cancer, you should reference this article. That's why I include it. They talk about all the different ones, all the most common cancers. Yeah, I'll let you peruse this at your own leisure if you desire to write about cancer for Unit 1 homework. Diabetes prevalence. I think that this might interest those of you who are kines majors and are writing about this a lot. I'll just tell you. This is the one where I ask you to use a health equity lens to view this on your quiz. And this is type 2 diabetes. You can see those differences. And, calling back to a previous lecture, you can decide whether there are disparities or not, right? So let's review this again. This is age adjusted as well. Much higher for American Indian, Alaska Native, for our indigenous folks. Asian non-Hispanic, we're doing pretty well. Black folks and Hispanics doing much worse, and white folks doing better with diabetes. So you can compare two of those to talk about a racial and ethnic disparity for diabetes prevalence. And there are some of the things that might fuel that. So when you are tasked with thinking about what fuels disparities, right? Think about ecological factors like this, ecological models pointing to different things on different, food deserts. Where would that be? Urban planning and architecture would be one. National physical activity advocacy, I'd count that. This is physical activity only, correlates to physical activity, so food deserts probably not on this one, but certainly for diabetes, should be and would be. Okay, so those are a few if you're interested in writing about them, some salient disparities in the US. Calling back to what I've said is the most egregious health inequity in the United States, we're going to talk about maternal mortality. We'll talk about it, we'll extend this conversation next week when we talk about fundamental causes in racism. Again, I think the estimate before was 3 times. This is it. 13 times 3 is more than 3 times. This is the most recent estimate that I could find from the CDC. We'll talk about what this is, the MMWR, later in the semester. So per 100,000 live births, and we'll go over why this is and what this means also later when we talk more quantitatively. 13 women, white women, per 100,000 live births die pregnancy-related deaths. 30 American Indian, Alaska Native women die pregnancy-related deaths, and 41 Black women. 3 times the burden. Another metric, And this is for all age groups. You can see that it's horrible among what we generally call geriatric pregnancies. That generally comparing age groups, maternal mortality occurs a lot more, but egregiously among Black women, increasing with age. But for age adjusted, all age groups, still 12.7, 43.5, that's more than 3 times. Comparing these two groups, more than 3 times. Okay, so looking at statistics can be a bummer, but I also want to elevate the narratives that are salient to this. Have you heard of this story? This is Tori Bowie. And this is why behavioral explanations, especially for this, really, really aggravate me. They won gold, Olympic gold, in 4x100 meter relay in 2016 Olympics in Rio. She's an Olympic gold medalist. By the metrics that you probably considered health to be when you came into this class, healthier than us. I'm not going to no Olympics, let alone winning gold, right? This is a healthy person. A trained athlete. Found dead in her home due to complications related to childbirth at 8 months pregnant, was 32 when she died. Not much older than you and I. And they cited possible contributing complications included respiratory distress and eclampsia. So, stress-related things, biological mechanisms are there. Allison Felix wrote this great article about her experience giving birth and about her teammate, titled Tori Bowie Can't Die in Vain, with basically a call to action to fix the maternal mortality disparity in the United States. So, if you're interested in that, go read this article. So you might ask why. There are a myriad of hypothesized reasons. This is another great collection of narratives. But one reason is that doctors don't take them being Black women, seriously. When they complain of pain, when they complain of stress, doctors can dismiss that and see it as less valid. And you may think, oh, like, what kind of horrible doctor would do that? Another thing, too, is how we structure access to healthcare, lack of access to quality healthcare. It isn't that you just go to hospitals and hospitals are all the same. Often there are public and private hospitals very near each other that some people can access and others can't. Usually along the lines of race, ethnicity, income, socioeconomic position, all the things we've talked about. But in the doctors don't take them seriously vein, next week we'll talk more about implicit bias and what that is. If you've never taken like the implicit bias tests, I might give them to you next week. This is an article about how implicit bias contributes to racial disparities in maternal morbidity and mortality in the United States. Basically suggesting that implicit bias, when those providers are dismissive of that pain, whether or not it's a conscious thing they're doing along the lines of race, contributes to this egregious disparity, right? So there's that. I also want to implore you to look into disparities. Don't just take what they are for face value, and look out for your community. I'm Filipino. I'm a violence researcher first and foremost, but I've known plenty of men in my family to have died of cardiovascular disease, or to have had heart attacks. My dad's had a heart attack. So, heart disease and health disparities. We'll get to my thing. Of course, disparities, we want to focus on comparing two groups. So here, Filipinos, Asians aren't even in the conversation yet. But African Americans are 30% more likely to die from heart disease than non-Hispanic whites. Okay, we'll get more to the quantitative portion later in this course, but I'll talk about what is happening here. This is age-adjusted heart disease death rates per 100,000 people. So per 100,000 people, 267 and a half. It's weird to think about a half person, but that's how the numbers crunch out. Non-Hispanic Black men, died of heart disease in 2019, as compared to 210.7 non-Hispanic white men dying of heart disease in 2019 per 100,000. And this is per 100,000 deaths. So the ratio of that, 267.5 over 210.7, is 1.3. These just all happen to be the same thing. If you put this number over this number, it's 1.3. Now, the 1 would just be the baseline, is that if there was no difference, this number over this number would be 1. Right? But these are different numbers. This number is bigger than this number. In fact, it's 30% bigger. So that 1.3, you subtract out the 1 because that's the baseline. Risks are equal. So they are 0.3 or 30% more likely to die from heart disease than non-Hispanic whites. And that's what we see among women, among total, and among men. So there you go. There's a little primer. And again, this is your leading cause of death in the United States. Now, this is a bit older data, but compares other races. So there's that 208, this is, 200-ish, 208 number that we saw here is also here. And that white adults, same thing, about the same, 1.66, 1.68. Hispanic adults actually doing better with regard to heart disease. And Asian or Pacific Islander adults, we're doing so well, right? Much fewer people dying of heart disease, at least on the surface. Right? I know my community. I know my family. I've known men who have died from this. Women too, but mostly men. When you look deeper. This is why disaggregated data are important, right? When we're lumped in with all Asian subgroups that are doing well, and this is true of Hispanic adults as well. I've learned about subgroup disparities among Hispanic adults. If this is something you know to be true, again, look up for community, write about it, teach me about it. But when you look at Asians, the Filipino subgroup had the highest prevalence of all 3 cardiovascular conditions and overall cardiovascular disease. This is like heart attack, death, and probably one other thing. Hypertension, maybe. And there you go. The multi-race Asian white group had significantly higher overall CVD prevalence. That's me, dog. So when you look deeper, try and find disaggregated data to look out for your community, advocate for your community, if you're interested in writing about these disparities. This is also important because if we're allotting funding, if we're allotting research funding looking at this, Filipinos are getting left behind, right? Then if we allot research funding looking at this, we can better advocate for ourselves. Doc, I know this is happening to me and my family. Like, just food for thought. And then I want your Unit 1 homework. Again, look out for your community. If there are things you know are plaguing you and your people, write about them. Use this as an opportunity to develop that language. So there you go. Theories, models, and frameworks. Back into the boring stuff. I actually like these two. Again, we're dealing with our word minority, but this is a very famous and great model. I just used it in my qualifying exam, actually, the minority stress model. I know it's a lot of graphics and arrows, but what they're suggesting is that disadvantage produces stress specific to being a minority, to a minority identity. Right? That then produces additional stress as compared to general stress that can further health outcomes. They also suggest that it can be buffered by coping and social support, like we talked about last week, right? Social support theory. Here it is again. And coping and the inverse of loneliness, social support, right, can buffer the impacts of that stress on health outcomes. But that, being a minority, depending on your identity, can, I think this is specific to queer folks, or at least in this iteration, in this application, but they can experience concealment, so hiding your sexuality from the people around you, internalized homophobia, thinking more negatively about yourself because of how stigma in society has led you to feel. Expectations of rejection, like, oh, I can't self-disclose to this person because I will lose social capital, right? And prejudice events obviously are stressors. From microaggressions to hate crimes, those are prejudice events. And this is all occurring on top of general stress. So, that's one theory, model, or framework. You can also think about this with regard to the disparities you've learned today. And the theory of gender and power. Now, this is HIV sexual risk among women in Tanzania. But there are three main things: sexual division of labor, sexual division of power, and cathexis, that all interplay. And by sexual, we're talking about like biological sex, not intercourse. We'll also define that later. That these different socioeconomic exposures, physical exposures, and social exposures interact to produce additional vulnerability to HIV. So those are the three main tenets of theory of gender and power. Okay. We're moving toward the end. The next part is mostly a glossary for writing about health disparities that, again, I want to arm you with that language to be a good advocate, write about disparities well. This is going to be a little bit rote, a little bit dry. I might just skip some slides and let you read them on your own and apply them, use them as a resource when you seek to apply them. Biological expressions of social inequality. Yes, I do understand, obviously, I've talked all about the social implications, social reasonings for health disparities. I do know that there are, genetic differences, and people have different genetics that make them look different type of way. But biological expressions of social inequity refers to how people literally embody and biologically express experiences of economic and social inequality from in utero to death, thereby producing social inequalities in health across a wide spectrum of outcomes. If, up until recently, the NIH had a lot of grant funding for people who wanted to do bench research and figure out why people of color died sooner, to find the gene that did it. Millions of dollars. And they funded it every single time. Every 5 years, we're giving out tens of millions of dollars to the researcher who can do it, and it never happened. Only now, very recently, like we're talking 2020 recent, they've started to create funding avenues to look at social rationale for why people of color die sooner. So we'll also talk next week about the social construction of race, that race is a product of racism and not the other way around. Again, I do realize that people have different, alleles and manifestations of genes that make them look different. And genetic risk factors for disease. Not dismissing that. But yeah, we'll talk about it more next week. And this was originated by Mr. Social Epi Louis-René Villarmé. Research socioeconomic gradients in and effects of poverty on mortality, morbidity, and height. Height was hypothesized to be whatever. And then discrimination, I'll leave you with this. Or will I? No, I won't. Just a few things. There's your definition. As an exposure social epidemiologists must, we learned about that last week, operationalize diverse expressions of exposure, susceptibility, and resistance to discrimination when thinking about applying the minority stress model and how that might look like. The prejudice events, discrimination specific to minority identities, is an additional burden of stress that can vary by these things. Type. Where did it happen? How was it expressed? How long did it happen? How intense was it? Was it a microaggression or was it a hate crime? Is this your mom telling you this every day, or was it an offhand comment of a person on a bus, right? Did this happen for years of your life? Did this happen at an important time of your life? So, yeah, that's what I'll leave you with. Embodiment. This is a great one. A concept referring to how we literally incorporate biologically the material and social world in which we live from in utero to death. And I'm not talking about like just microplastics. Is that we're talking about more epigenetics. No aspect of our biology can be understood absent knowledge of history and individual societal ways of living. Is that you are embodying a lot of the pain of you and people in your family from previous generations, right? And that stress will take years off your life. Example of discrimination and embodiment. This is a big bummer. But this research article looked at the relation of sexism, so discrimination based on sex toward women, and distress to women's drinking and smoking behaviors. Right, we have all this research, especially about stigmatizing substance use. It's like these people, it's their fault that they are so susceptible to these behaviors, right? Now we're looking more at addiction as a disease, which I think is a good thing. The disease framing of addiction. But this study of female college students, which some of you are, showed that the relation between perceived sexism and binge drinking and smoking was mediated by psychological distress. Folks are drinking and smoking to mitigate the stress that is produced by sexism. So if you have these family members at this table that are like, oh, well, it's because they're drinking and smoking so much, I implore you to look at the causes of the causes. We know that smoking causes lung cancer, right? We know that smoking causes heart disease. We know that drinking causes liver cancer. What causes drinking? What causes smoking? Stress. What causes stress? So when you're thinking about presenting something, a difference as a disparity, right, of these preventable things, get to the causes of the causes. Okay, gender, sexism, and sex. I hope you know the difference here by now. Gender is a social construct regarding culture-bound conventions, roles, and behaviors for, as well as relationships between and among women and men and boys and girls, right? This is the social thing. Gender identity. Gender is a spectrum. Versus sex. Sex is a biological construct premised upon biological characteristics enabling sexual reproduction. There are 3 sexes: male, female, and intersex. Obviously, intersex has a lot of different manifestations, but if you were taking a survey of people's sex, male, female, intersex covers it. Gender, harder to measure, right? Gender is a big spectrum that can vary by expression. And then sexism, like we said before here. This is what we're talking about. Involves inequitable gender relationships and refers to institutional and interpersonal practices whereby members of dominant gender groups, typically men if you live in patriarchal society, which we do, accrue privileges, we'll talk about this word next week as well, by subordinating other gender groups, typically women and femmes, and justify these practices via ideologies of innate superiority, difference, or deviance, right? Living in patriarchal society and perceiving that subordination cause distress, cause drinking. That will cause, we know those links between behavior and outcome. So, there you go, there's that food for thought. Human rights and social justice. We use these words a lot, but very difficult to define, but human rights as a concept presumes that all people are born free and equal in dignity and rights, and provides a universal frame of references for deciding questions of equity and social justice. Sounds pretty good, right? And international human rights laws about defining what governments can do to us, cannot do to us, and should do for us. Right? There are 2 types of laws, those that restrict and those that provide, like negative enforcing laws and positive enforcing laws. And so thinking about human rights framework, you can think about both. These 2 would be the first half, and should do for us would be the latter, that positive. And then social justice frameworks. People really vilify this word, like, without really understanding what it actually means. Social justice frameworks explicitly analyze who benefits from and who is harmed by economic exploitation, oppression, discrimination, inequality, and degradation of natural resources. Sounds like a pretty important endeavor when you actually look at the definition. With the goal of creating just and sustainable societies. I would like to live in a just and sustainable society, wouldn't you? And then stress. Yeah, let's go over it together. At least this first and last part. Stress is a construct whose meaning in health research is variously defined in relationship to stressful events, responses, and individual appraisals of situations. We all do experience stress, right? In most situations, the physiologic changes associated with the stress response are transient, with the body returning to its baseline state when the stressor is removed. Positive stress response is normal, right? Like, oh, the light went out in the street, I should probably get home faster. This is helping me understand risk generally. As a child, you don't get to eat 24/7, right? If I have to go a little bit without food while I am hungry, I am stressed, but that's me learning my own satiety cues. So positive stress response is normal and essential for growth and development. It helps you gain motivation and resilience. Tolerable stress responses are more severe, frequent, or sustained, right? If now my body is, I'm still not getting the food, I'm very, very hungry, and I can't get out of that stress response and be fed, I miss lunch, I'm going to keep being stressed, and that will be more frequent, sustained. And toxic stress responses include a prolonged or permanent admirable physiologic response to a stressor with risk of end organ dysfunction. Shit is serious. Right? If I'm trying to exist in an environment that is not sustainable for my wellness, toxic stress will kill you. Okay. Some different dimensions of inequity. Honestly, I would just go with, I screenshotted that box from your reading before. I had these for think about things that you could write about for your Unit 1 homework, but I like the box from your reading better. But these are all the, at least some of the dimensions for which you can write about disparities for your Unit 1 homework. Now, back to our picture. Does someone want to take a guess at what's happening in the justice in a third frame? It's really coming down outside. I'll give you a minute to think about this. And I won't move on until someone chats. So if no one's in chat, that's really awkward. Take a guess, be brave. The entire barrier is removed to begin with. Correct. That's exactly it. We can talk about equal distribution of resources. We can talk about equitable distribution of resources. But when the structural barrier is removed, then people have the liberty to exist as their full and authentic selves without worry about experiencing society in the way that is the way they deserve. Yeah, the entire barrier is moved to begin with. Fence/barrier is removed, so the boxes aren't even needed, giving everyone a chance or what they deserve, right? Great, you all got it. All of you got it. Wonderful job. When that systemic barrier is removed, we have justice. Social barriers are removed, yep. And the equality, equity measures aren't needed, yep. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. All right. With that, I have a vote of confidence that we're ready to think about. We're ready to think about Unit 1 homework. Okay. It is 50 points. It's a lot of points. And it's due at the end of this month on Leap Day. The prompt is posted on the assignment page, and I gotta crank out an example for you to enjoy on Thursday. This is it, the gist in bullet point form, but the prompt is posted on the assignment page, okay? So you are to select a specific health disparity to focus on. We went over some today, but more than anything, I encourage you to find one that interests you. You know how to look into the literature now and do that. This could be based on, yeah, we've already gone over this. Tell me, what is the inequality? What is the difference in burden between who and who? Tell me, what is the disparity? What social determinants of health are relevant? And then you'll propose a possible intervention targeting 2 specific levels of the socio-ecological model, and tell me what those are, so that I can ensure that you're thinking about the model in the correct way. At least 750 words. That's not true. I probably would read more than 1,200. I won't read more than 1,500. I will fully stop reading because they're 80 view. I love you and I love your ideas, but 1,500 is probably where I'd stop. You must use at least 2 sources in cite. Use an in-text and references page. I've given you little tips and tricks for doing that in last week. Google Scholar, I already did you this. I suggest APA 7 or JAMA. And because this course is new and improved, right? I did this last semester, but I've really thought more about continuation of this course and longevity of this course. 5 points extra credit if I select yours to be an example for future semesters. You still get the 5 points too if I don't know how many I'm going to pick either. If I pick literally all yours and I just have a wonderful body of work that I can give to future students, great. But even if you don't want yours to be used as an example, if I think it's good enough, you'll get 5 points extra credit. And I'll kind of be grading these on like a check plus and give you comments if you'd like. But I'll be doing check plus. Can we use MLA for citing? Yep, you sure can. You can, any reputable thing is fine. These are just suggestions because I'm more familiar with them. Okay, good quick lecture today. So next week, quiz 2 is already available to you. I've kind of decided that they should be available during class. If you really wanted to have it open and like do the quiz while I was talking, that is a possibility. So quiz 2 is available to you now, actually. Activity on Thursday will be a scientific writing workshop. I'm hoping that you'll at least leave with an outline of your Unit 1 homework. And you can get all answers to all your questions about what my expectations are of Unit 1 homework. So think about a health inequality to write about and figure out if it's a disparity. All right. Any questions? I'm going to do the Wordle and do the connections, and feel free to chime in with questions. I'll stay for that length of time. All right, let me get the Wordle up. Super morbid, but let's start today with death. We have talked about life expectancy a lot today. Awesome. Let's go then with maybe something SH, blush. I'm here for questions. Please ask any questions about the course or Unit 1 homework, lecture, or my life. We're just hanging out for another 10-15 minutes. Okay, now I want something CH. Pinch. Okay, then I imagine that the I would be here. Maybe it starts with I. Okay, we also have O. Boom, boom, boom. Hard Wordle today. Okay, now I need to start thinking about if any of these could be repeated. I was thinking of doing non-English speakers, lack of quality healthcare because of limited use of interpreters, or is that too broad? Link it to a specific outcome. And I think that would be okay. And have lack of quality healthcare and lack of interpreters be your social determinants. And one of your interventions could probably be training interpreters or requiring interpreters in the field. But yeah, absolutely that does impact a lot of health outcomes, especially in this area. Pick one would be my suggestion. But I like that idea. That's a great idea. Sexism as a disparity will work. Sexism as a determinant, yes. So you can compare men and women. Obviously, something like breast cancer wouldn't work because there are a whole bunch of biological reasons why that inequality exists. But if there is a disparity based on sex that you want to write about, absolutely that would work. Sorry, not disparity, haha. No worries. But yeah, as a determinant, yep. I'm happy to talk through ideas more specifically with you as well here. I'm kind of blowing this wordle anyway. I might do something, or I might guess something else that doesn't have that to figure out where the I is. And maybe try and get something with O. Let's guess the word doily, just to figure out the rest of our possible vowels. Okay, I is there. Great. Like, what could this word be? Something ICH. Feel free to help me out, Epidemiology Shining Stars. Unless you've done the Wordle, like, don't, play along at home with me. Don't just tell me the answer if you already know it, but if you've already done it today. Oh, I know what it is. I know what it is. It has to be this, right? Alright, we got it. Which? This is hard? Yeah. Alright, let's do the connections. When it's always a double letter when I'm struggling. Alright, I'm usually really good at the connections, but one of my friends had a hard time today. Again, feel free to continue on with questions if you actually want to talk about course content. Ooh. I am immediately inclined to believe that this could be euphemisms for fart, but I don't want to write that. I don't want to send that immediately because oxygen is also here. All right, honey, platinum. These are going to be blondes. Strawberry blonde and not like bright blonde. What's another tone? Dirty blonde? Dirty blonde. This is definitely blondes. Got it. Okay. Of. That's interesting. Garish. Garish is like an outlandish, or like it sticks out in like a showy way, right? And what's hug? Loud. 0. Flashy. Okay, flashy, loud, garish, bright. I feel like these 4, like, manners of. I imagine someone wearing like a lime green jumpsuit, and this is how they could be described as dressing. Yep. Ostentatious as an outfit. Perfectly. Immediately I got it. Okay. I'm kind of going back to this. Euphemism for fart. Perfect. And what's this? Can we guess it? I can't. Oh, what O might mean. So like X's and O's. Oxygen, that makes sense. 0. Wonderful. All right. Thanks for sticking with me for puzzles. I'm always available for questions over email, and I'll see some of you on Thursday. Bye-bye.